When free markets have to deal with the transmission of information, they have a possible task. Or more precisely, they have a huge number of possible tasks. Nobody has one huge task to fulfill. Everyone is making individual decisions, and the pricing system coordinates those decisions. Let me give you an example to see how this works. So suppose that all of a sudden going to Cracker Barrel gets popular. And because of this, of course, what do they sell at Cracker Barrel? Nostalgia and cast iron products, among other things. Right? Now, let's look at the cast iron products. So partly because of this, cast iron products start to get particularly cast iron pots and pans become very popular. Well, what's going to happen? Well, what happens in a free market when demand for something goes up? One of two things. The price rises or they produce more. Or often, the price starts to rise and then they produce more. So all of a sudden, the people who produce cast iron pots and pans are like, wow, Cracker Barrel has really been ordering more. Right? Demand is up. So what's going to happen? Well, they're going to have to stop and say, will we produce more or will we charge more? Because currently, or each factory owner says, I and my competition currently supplies about what the demand is. Demand just went up, so unless we all start producing more, right, we're going to have to all start charging more to figure out who gets the cast iron. Or more to the point, we can, so we will, because it's in our interest to do so. Well, what determines which of these things they're going to do? Right? Well, part of it is the demand. Of course, if we're just looking at people who produce cast iron pots and pans, right, it's the demand for cast iron pots and pans, but it's also the availability of cast iron and labor and land to have factories and machinery to produce more cast iron. Right? There's a lot of factors that go into it. So which is going to be the better option? Right? Well, it depends. Let's focus on one of those factors. And notice, we've only got one of those factors. That's cast iron. Well, okay, you've got people supplying cast iron. So they're like, okay, the people who make cast iron pots and pans, they're asking for more. Right? Now, all these other people are asking for cast iron for various things. So what do? Right? Well, that's going to depend on the availability of labor, equipment, raw materials. So let's focus on one of the raw materials, which is iron. Well, let's say they decide, well, let's try producing more. Right? We'll go to the people who produce iron. Well, what happens? Well, the people who produce iron are going to have to stop and say, all right, now all the people who make cast iron, right, are demanding more. Right? So either we raise our prices or we start producing more iron. Right? We use some mines that were in kind of remote areas or difficult to work, various things we can do to get iron. Or we raise our prices. Well, which one will they do? Well, it depends. Were there floods in iron-producing regions this year? Okay. How many unused mines are there out there? And of course, it depends on how much is required for steel or for other uses for iron. Okay. So if steel is in high demand, right, well, that makes a difference. Right? Whereas if there doesn't seem to be as much use for steel, well, then there won't be then the people with cast iron won't have to compete with the people who need cast iron won't have to compete with the people who need steel. So let's say they decide, no, actually, we're going to have to raise prices. Well, now prices go up on cast iron and steel. Right? So you've got the people who produce steel, and they realize, we can't get as much iron. It's more expensive now to produce steel. What are we going to do? Right? Well, I guess you could try to find a substitute for iron. That's maybe impossible, right? That's one of the key components of steel. Right? So what you're probably going to have to do is raise your prices. Okay. So now suppose you've got a bicycle manufacturer. Right? Well, he's noticed the price of steel has gone up. So what does he do? Well, he has a choice, which is charge more or find a substitute. Let's say that he can't find a substitute. Let's say he experiments with aluminum, but it's not going to work, or at least it's going to take too long. So for the time being, prices have to go up. So prices in bicycles are up because of the price of steel and the inability to find a substitute. Well, now the prices of bicycles go up. Now, suppose you have someone who's thinking, do I buy a bicycle or do I buy a bus pass? Well, the price of bicycles went up. Right? And assuming for now that the price of buses stays the same, now he's going to say, well, given the rise in the price of bicycles, it makes more sense to buy the bus pass. Now, look at what's happened here. You got these people who are going to Cracker Barrel, right? And it causes more popularity for cast iron products. And over here, you have someone in another part of the country deciding whether or not to get a bus pass or a bicycle. And the fact that these people are going to Cracker Barrel has an influence on whether or not it's a good idea for him to get a bus pass. Right? Because, right, given that demand has gone up relative to supply, right, now iron is in a sense, and steel becomes a more scarce resource, which makes it more, in a sense, more costly. Right? To produce bicycles, right, more bicycles is going to make it more difficult for other people to have something that they want. Right? Now, the important thing here is to notice that nobody has to know what's going on in the system as a whole. Right? So the people who want to buy the cast iron pan, those customers, don't have to know about the floods in the iron producing region. They don't have to know anything about the fact that the non-availability of aluminum, or the fact that aluminum wasn't working as a good substitute, is the reason why we couldn't just lower the demand for steel. They don't have to know any of that stuff. All they have to know is the price of cast iron pots has gone up, so I should reconsider whether it's worth spending some of my resources to get this. Right? So we have to say, okay, now that the price has gone up, would it be better to get this other thing I want rather than the cast iron pot? On the other end of things, the person deciding on the bus pass doesn't have to know why the price of bicycles went up. He doesn't have to know anything about the shortage of iron or the sudden demand for cast iron. All he has to know is the price of a bus pass hasn't gone up and the price of the bicycle has. So what's going on here? As Friedman puts it, the pricing system gets the right information into the inboxes of each of the relevant people without cluttering it up with unnecessary information. And of course, it gives them an incentive to seek out the information. He also adds, in fact, that it gives other people an incentive to find ways to provide the information. How does the person who's deciding whether to use steel figure out the price? Well, he tends to know if he's in the industry of things that produce steel. Right? How does the bicycle manufacturer know? He picks up the Wall Street Journal, which is put out by a for-profit company, and lists the prices of all these different commodities. So that's the idea, right? It gives people an incentive to go out and seek the relevant information, and it makes it easy for them to get the information they need without being overloaded by a bunch of information they don't. So the pricing system does a very good job of transmitting the right information to the people who need it.